At UMC, access to your healthcare is only a call away. Dial 74NURSE for free, instant medical advice from experienced and trusted UMC nurses, 24 hours a day. Learn more at umchealthsystem.com.
And welcome in everyone to RedRaiders.com. I'm Zach Long, this is Krista Pirtle, and it's time for Topics with Krista as we look at the Texas Tech football team, the Big 12, and the NCAA as a whole. And Krista, of course, getting everyone ready to go for Oklahoma and Texas Tech. Huge game in Norman, Oklahoma. We're looking forward to making the drive up there for what should be one of the best games in the country this weekend.
Yeah, it should be pretty good. It's the first on the slate for Texas Tech that's going to be huge going into the rest of the season. And I don't think you have to do much to get Tech fans pumped up about this game. It's Oklahoma. It's in Norman. Oklahoma is one of the hallowed names of Big 12 football, so It'll be a really good game. Last
time they took a ton of people up there, sat through a rain delay, and saw a heck of an upset of a number one ranked team. They'll remember that one, and I think they'll grab every ticket they can get their hands on in the old visiting section in Memorial Stadium. Speaking of Texas Tech, Krista, all the way back through the Mike Leach era, people are used to offensive production out of the Red Raiders, but what they're doing this year is pretty outstanding in terms of distribution of the ball.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's been great going from Baker Mayfield to Davis Webb, yes, they're both freshmen, but they're two different guys, and they've been so successful because they each have the same targets to throw to. Jason Morrow, Eric Ward, Bradley Marquez, Jakeem Grant. Each one of them have over 30 catches, and that leads some major BCS conferences in reception. So I think that's a big deal that, yes, as a running game has struggled, these guys have been consistent no matter who has thrown them the ball.
And there's nothing more that helps your confidence as a young quarterback when you have that arsenal around you, and that'll be huge if they want to have success this week against Oklahoma.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Jakeem Grant will be back because his speed adds some dynamic with Jakeem adds a dynamic to Jason Morrow, who's huge, but also Eric Ward is always dependable, and Bradley Marquez hit him on the fade time and time again, and he's open.
And Eric Ward's going to bounce back at some point. You know, he's had some struggles. He's battled through a lot. He is a very tough individual. There's going to be a point where he's going to break out again and have one of those 150-yard games. It's just a matter of time as to when that happens. Crystal, this week, of course, the BCS standings come out, and we're looking at the Big 12 standings as well. And we're so used to seeing Texas, Oklahoma, even recently Oklahoma State setting at the top of that. And right now, it's Texas Tech and Baylor setting the trend of leaders in the Big 12 Conference.
Who would have thought? Texas Tech, yeah, you would think so. Baylor, I'm sorry. No one would have ever thought that. Basketball, women's basketball, maybe. Football,
not football.
Never. But my question is, do these new faces of the Big 12, does that hurt the conference?
I think in a sense it does hurt it because they're not traditional powers. And when it comes down to the BCS folks, if we have a situation where there's 4 or 5 undefeated teams, what they're going to start scrutinizing heavily is what conference you came from and what your prestige is. And I know it's supposed to be only based upon what you've done on the field this year. Well, that's a bunch of malarkey, especially when you put the humanistic interest into polls with coaches and then the Harris Interactive poll as well. It is a big disadvantage for the Big 12. They need some teams to lose. Even if one of these two teams, Texas Tech or Baylor, stays undefeated and moves up in the BCS ranking, I have a hard time believing they're going to have the momentum to overtake an Oregon or a Florida State team if they're both undefeated.
Yeah, those teams really need to lose to get the Big 12 in the big championship game to face none other than probably Alabama.
And also another storyline with this situation where Texas Tech and Baylor are setting atop the Big 12 and also the two Big 12 teams highest up in the BCS rankings, they also kind of have the cart on their shoulders. And if one of them would lose, not going to be good for the Big 12, especially if it's before November 16th in Arlington, Texas.
Yeah, I think that game day could come to Jerry World to watch that game because I think it's going to be huge. Undefeated against undefeated, both of them similar high-flying offenses, but what is overlooked a lot of the time is their defenses are both really pretty good as well. So I think that if Baylor loses, then it's like, yeah, okay, Texas is going to go in there, and if Baylor wins, cool.
Yeah, it'll lose its luster, and then if you look at it, Krista, from a standpoint of if the Big 12 is going to be successful, and if you're a Big 12 fan and want to see someone in a national title game, you have to root for Texas Tech and Baylor not to lose, especially up until the point we need one of them to survive that November 16th matchup and go in undefeated. And there's been a lot of anarchy in the top 10. We're not saying those teams are all going to finish undefeated when you talk about Alabama, Florida State, and Oregon, but if they don't, the momentum has to be strong on the part of Texas Tech or Baylor.
Absolutely, and I think I'm going to go on to our next point in this topic is that when the BCS poll came out, everybody was like, why is Baylor only 8 and Texas Tech only 10? Like they're undefeated. Some of these schools have lost games. Well, the truth of the matter is, strength of schedule, what they've played, kind of sucky. So that needs to build up. And if Baylor loses before Tech plays, then that strength of schedule declines.
Way down.
If Tech loses before Baylor plays them, that strength of schedule declines. So I think for both of them to be happy and to get those really good bowl games, they both need to go into that November 16th matchup undefeated to get the grace from the BCS gods so that they can get really good bowl selections.
Yeah, because if things play out the right way, if both those teams have a great season, one finishes with 1 loss and one goes undefeated, you're looking at a situation where one of them ends up probably in the Fiesta Bowl, and the other one could be an at-large into the Sugar Bowl, depending on some of the non-AQ qualifiers who end up in the higher ranks of the BCS standings. So Tech and Baylor have a ton to play for, but before we sit here and just seal up a Texas Tech or a Baylor Big 12 title, Texas, Oklahoma, even Oklahoma State can control a lot of that on their own by getting big wins in the month of November.
Yeah, and how has Texas stayed in this conversation?
They're still there. They're
I've
3-0 in Big 12 play.
They won't go away.
And everyone expected them just to fold after those losses to BYU and Ole Miss. And, you got to give them credit. They have stabilized the ship a little bit, and I think we're all still waiting for the other shoe to drop. You better prepare yourself. If it doesn't drop, Texas, even with 2 losses, they're going to be right in the middle of that Big 12 championship discussion, and they could be looking at a Fiesta Bowl berth as well. A lot to get done here. We're probably getting way ahead of ourselves because we've said all year November was going to be separation month for the Big 12, and we're excited. We're ready to get up to Norman, and I think we're ready to see the games over the course of the next few weeks.
Yeah, and I think, yes, we've been talking about Tech and Baylor, but any one of these teams can win, and they don't have to be undefeated to do it, as we've said before, time and time again. It's going to be interesting to see how it folds out. I don't think if they lose a game that they'll be in the national championship. I think that ship has sailed. But I think that it's important to see how these teams will bounce back after a loss and go back and face a really tough team on their schedule. I think that will show a lot of resiliency and see maybe how they really are as compared to the fluffy schedule they've played before.
And key point, if you're a Texas Tech fan, you could not be more happy right now with your situation, especially the way the last 2 seasons have went for Texas Tech. Kingsbury has his team rolling. They're 7-0. They've put themselves in a position to be in this conversation and possibly win themselves a Big 12 title. But first up, Krista, Texas Tech, Oklahoma in Norman, a huge one. Be sure and check out all of our coverage getting you ready for that game. Of course, Don versus Twitter, our UMC Health System AJ Media pregame show up online right now, and we'll be in Norman on Friday for Road Rage and to get you locked in and ready for Saturday, 2:30 p.m., Texas Tech, Oklahoma. Until that time, that is Krista Pirtle. I am Zach Long. This is RedRaiders.com.